Hey friends, welcome to another episode of the 10 Laws Podcast with East Forest. I am Mr. Forrest. Thanks so much for joining us again this week. This week, I'm really excited because I have Mr. Jon Hopkins, the one and only, on the podcast. And for those of you who maybe paid a little attention, we released a track that's from his new album, and the track is called Sit Around the Fire. That also features some recordings from Ram Dass. But this is part of Jon's new album that is called Music for Psychedelic Therapy that releases on November 12th on Domino Records. So it's coming out very soon, depending on when you're listening to this. This may already be out. But I just, more than anything, I mean, Jon is someone that I've admired and been a fan of for many, many years. But I really wanted to ask him questions about how this record was made and how it came to be and the inspiration for it, because just as a user and a fan, I got to experience the record with some ketamine therapy at Radha's clinic, and I just found it so profound. And there's not many people out there making music explicitly for the psychedelic space, and it's so exciting that someone of Jon's caliber is stepping into that field. So I know you're going to love this episode because I think we really get under the hood, and Jon's just really vulnerable and honest about the work and so willing to share about his process in many, many different ways. And we recorded this a while ago, actually. I believe it was in August. But we hadn't even done the event together in Austin at this point. We hadn't met in person. We'd probably known each other in a virtual space for over a year, collaborating and just hanging out online. But we hadn't met up yet. So I had the honor, after this was recorded, as you might know, to do that joint event together in Austin, Texas. And it was a ceremony concert, in addition to a deep immersive listening of this entire album, Music for Psychedelic Therapy, of his. And it was so cool to hear the album in that live space because it was on this really large surround sound system, and the bass and the low-end elements become so physical in the room on a system like that. And that's something that I had heard when I listened to the record. It's the beautiful sub-frequencies that I think Jon is so masterful at. But to feel it in a big space and to feel and to listen to the album with a group of people and witness it in that sort of shared group consciousness was just awesome. And even more awesome for him to be right there. So we had a blast together. We got spent a lot of time the next day together. And he feels like a kindred spirit. He feels like a brother from another mother. So I just couldn't be more excited to share this with you. And I look forward to you to finally being able to hear his entire record, Music for Psychedelic Therapy. And if you haven't heard Sit Around the Fire, the single that is out now with Ram Dass, Jon Hopkins, and myself in there, go hear it. Give yourself the 8 minutes to really set aside to either put on some good headphones or listen to that on a good system, and give this space and time for it to really sink in, because there's a lot of juju there in it. Ram Dass is in this really beautiful place, and it's worth it to let it fully sink in and fully receive that gift. Even better, if you want to see the video that was made, it's stunning too. It was made by the production house, Yes Please. You can find it on YouTube. Just search Sit Around the Fire, Jon Hopkins or Ram Dass, and you should find it. It's one of the finest animations I've ever seen of the Be Here Now book, which is the 50th anniversary of the book. We get into all these amazing alignments and synchronicities, but I'll let you hear us talk about it in the podcast ourselves. But before we get into this, just a little bit of business. 2 announcements. I just announced some live dates. It's going to be in Dublin. Speaking of our friends overseas, such as Jon, that's April 9th in Dublin. It's my first time in Ireland, period, let alone playing. We're working on a UK show, so stay tuned for that. We're actually working on a lot of shows. There's going to be a lot of announcements for what we can do in 2022. So the best way to know about those and get the tickets for some of these limited space shows is the newsletter, so eastforest.org. They're also going to be playing in Boise in middle of December. We're going to be announcing that soon, a ceremony concert. But on December 4th, coming right up, is sort of my virtual release event for Journey Space, which is that new platform that I just launched, journeyspace.com, which is a space for online live facilitated journeys. So you can go there and we're guiding journeys with music, but there's a person there in real time and then in small groups. So sort of like I was saying, it's powerful to be in a group in Austin and to experience that music together. We know that, witnessing together in groups and one another and accountability and the support and compassion of those spaces are valuable beyond just being an individual and by ourselves. So that's kind of the magic of Journey Space, is that we do these events where you can come together online and be guided in the Journey Space, however you see fit to do that. And we also provide some preparation and integration circles. So check it out. It's journeyspace.com, and it's an ongoing thing, and it's an experiment. So I want to see how it works for you. But December 4th is our inaugural event, and it's an online event that you can do it through Journey Space and be in that small group. That's limited in size, so join up if you want to do that. But the live stream itself, I'll be playing live, will be open to anyone. And so that will be on YouTube Live like I did those in the past. I'll be streaming it and performing from my studio here in Boise, Idaho. And I'm hoping to have some new instruments to share with you on that, so I'm very excited about that. But if you want all the details about the link to watch or Journey Space, you can just go to eastforest.org, and it's all right there on the front page or on the tour page, and I think you'll see what you need to see. And lastly, as the holidays are coming up, we put a few new fun things in the store. They're not there yet, but I just want to give you a heads up. We got these cool new dad hats with the Nautilus on them. And we also have a sheet music book that Lorna Doone helped me transcribe. Well, she did the transcription. I just helped edit it. It's awesome. It's something I've been wanting to do for many, many years. So stay tuned for that. Piano players, there'll be some sheet music of 10 different East Forest songs, many of your favorites. And other than that, I'm just sort of prepping with Rada to go to Esalen in a few days for our little sold-out retreat there. Hopefully we'll be able to add more of those in the future, and we'll keep you informed. I just got back from Boulder, too. I was in Boulder down there in southern Utah for, it was like 5 weeks or something. It was so awesome. I did bounce to L.A. for that event. But the fall in Boulder, there's nothing like it. And the aspen trees and the colors and that crisp temperature but bright sunshine. Got to do some backpacking and some hiking. And the Glitch Mob came down, so we had some friends around. They were recording some good dinners. I feel very full from that space. And honestly, I wish I could hop down there and put that time period of October in southern Utah in a little capsule and just have it go forever. But the seasons continue as they do, and we go into the darkness and into the light in these motions of from repose to excitement to challenges, continuing to compost. The point is to be on the journey, to surf what there is to surf, and to wait sometimes for another wave, and always just get back up, looking out to the horizon. Not knowing what's next, but trusting that there's always something, and we're always part of that ocean. Enough of that philosophizing for this point in time, but I'm going to let us get right into this. This is very, very exciting. So this is the one and only Mr. Jon Hopkins. Jon, thank you so much for doing this, man. We've been getting to know each other for, it might be, it's not a year. I think it was probably, actually, I don't really know. It was somewhere
I feel like pandemic. It was May last year.
Shit.
Yeah.
So it's not a year then. Or is it a year?
No, it is. It's August now.
Oh my God.
It's over a year.
All right. It's over a year. We're old friends. Yeah. So.
And yet we haven't met.
Yeah, I know. I have actually a long list of people that I've collaborated with that I've only met virtually like this. It's, really? Not because I enjoy that, but that's just how sometimes the cookie crumbles,
Sure.
We're far apart. But I'm looking forward to crossing paths in your neck of the woods or here sometime soon. But
yeah, likewise.
But thank you for doing this. I really wanted to take the opportunity to dive into this new work of yours because I have so many questions just as a listener as I dove into that space. Music for Psychedelic Therapy, this record, is, I feel like, a bit different for you, but also it's just by the nature of its title is sort of a unique offering. And so there's something to unpack there. And I just wanted to start with, if you could tell us a bit about, this is an official Jon Hopkins record, like it's a release for you, but what about this is different aside on the face of it, you know, what it's called and what it's for, or is it different for you, like this work from what you've done before?
It's very different, and I think the main way in which it's different is that this is something I've only become aware of retrospectively, but I think all the other albums, and I'm not like doing them down for it, but they all had more of a, they had goals within the external world that I was trying to achieve, like built into them. And like, let's take Immunity, for example, which was the first one that got wider attention. I wrote all of that, you know, with the same love and integrity that I try and apply to everything I write. But there was this fact, which was that it had to connect more, because I'd done 2 solo albums and it hadn't really connected to people. So I'd done a lot of collaborations and productions which had been more successful, and I'd done film scores and stuff. So I was like, I had a living, but I always thought I wanted to give it like one more try, you know, to make a solo record as a composer and just see if I can make that part of the picture. And of course, that one did that quite radically, so that the other things took a back seat, and that, you know, in a way it went to the other extreme. And but there was something built into that process of like, I have to make this one work. So I didn't leave anything to chance. I did my absolute best on all fronts, even so far as like making sure the titles weren't shit, because the previous albums had some very, very empty titles, because words are not my medium, you know. And for Immunity, I talked to a poet called Rick Holland, and we had long conversations, which he turned into freeform poetry, and I chose the names out of that. And, you know, right down to the artwork, which was like microscopic photography of crystals forming. And you know, everything was just on a different level as much as I could make it. And then Singularity was like, okay, so I've got to this point, I have to go to this point. And again, it was all done with love and integrity, but there was a huge amount of pressure, I suppose.
And they both took you a long time, right?
Yeah, that's a pattern. I mean, I think I like to spend a long time on things, even if I'm not working the whole of that time. So like maybe the duration of the whole process is 2 years, but in that time I might be writing for a year. I mean, it's something like that. But with this one, anyway, just to finish what I was saying about Singularity, there was like a desire, I think, even though I wasn't thinking about it as consciously as I was writing it, there was an intention to make big tracks that I could play in front of a lot of people, because, you know, the show size in Immunity had moved from the first show in London, which was 600, to the one at the end, which was like 10,000.
Wow.
That's the change in numbers. So I was like, okay, so we're starting at this number. And then Singularity ended with a show at Glastonbury to 35,000 people, which was on the BBC. Yeah, this is crazy. So this was, and I guess on some level I was aiming for that, whilst at the same time trying to still express myself truly. But all, you know, we've talked a bit about this privately, but like the experience of touring those records was, as in any musician who tours that much will tell you, it kills the body. You know, it can be incredibly difficult to, of course, to play hundreds of shows all over the world with your sleep pattern all over the place, and the pressure of having to be not just on form, but like on peak form at random times of the night, particularly in the DJ set part of it. So then, you know, pandemic comes along, and, you know, I really don't want to like attach the narrative to this album that it's a lockdown album. It's not. This is something that had started. We'll go back to the origins of it in a minute, but, you know, this is something that was in existence, but I didn't know it was going to become an album. But suddenly had all these months, and I was having a lot of personal upheaval. Good things and bad things were happening, and obviously the world was doing what the world was doing. And everyone was having their own kind of crises of different sizes and responses in different directions. And I just felt like this is the time to make a record with none of those intentions, to have absolutely no no real, nothing, no intention at all apart from honesty, like genuinely just to try and do that. And I thought I was doing that before, and it just turns out that I wasn't so much. So this is like the most unguarded, most honest, it's totally, not interested in calls, not interested in reviews, it's not interested in live shows. This is just my absolute declaration of who I am and what I believe and what I want to hear in music without any of those fences or guards, I suppose.
How much of that confidence to step into that vulnerable state, not just with your music, but with your career, came from revelations from the inner space, whether the psychedelic journeys themselves or meditation?
All of it.
What, yeah, like, tell me, was there a moment where you're like, I have to do this, I'm just going to do it?
Yeah, so the medicine that kind of seemed to, I think it's really difficult with me because I do a lot of different practices and it's quite hard to narrow down. I think quite often combinations of things are
absolutely
fascinating. And for me, it's a mixture of holistic practices like transcendental meditation, which is my kind of foundation practice, twice a day, every day for 6 years now. And then Kundalini yoga, which I've been doing for 20 years. And then the more extreme end of that, Wim Hof method breathing, which, it takes me to this extraordinary energetic kind of peak. And then there's the actual medicines. And the ones that I've found over the years, in recent years particularly, to be most safe and valuable for me have been MDMA and ketamine in different quantities and used in different ways. But I think the particular epiphany that led to the titling of this record came from I'd had a night with some friends, the first in ages, because lockdown in London was only just ending, and I went to some of my best friends had me around for a little dinner party, and we had a little MDMA afterwards, and it was wonderful. It was a lovely warm circle of loved ones, and we had a good laugh. And it wasn't like huge amounts or anything, but it was a sparkly and heartwarming thing, and it was the first time in a long time that I'd done anything like that. Hadn't done anything like that really the year before. And when I got home, it was like 4 a.m. and I was still awake. I was still quite high, I guess. And I was just like, I'm going to look a little bit of ketamine and see put some music on. And I just, on some sort of, following some strange intuition, I put on this album called Emerald. And this is by an artist called Elve, E-L-V-E. And if you have show notes for this, or you want to this album needs to be heard. It's the most extraordinary record, and I don't think my music would have taken this direction without hearing this record. I've been a fan of it, and I've talked about it a lot in the last 4 years since I heard it first. But I'm never going to stop talking about it. So it's like an immersive sound experience with a lot of field recording and a lot of very disintegrated elements that somehow seem to form a whole. It's very abstract. It doesn't have traditional melodic elements at all. But I heard it that night in that particular space, and I mean, I've heard that record on DMT and on various other things, but for something about that night, and maybe it's just the way everything aligned, I just had a sort of epiphany, really, which was that I would need to connect the various pieces of music I've been writing, some of which were along these lines, into one body of work, and it would be called Music for Psychedelic Therapy, because the power of that experience was so intense, so totally beyond words. And, sometimes I hear ketamine described as a neutral zone or a void, and for me it's not. It's absolutely bursting with life and energy and self-love and compassion, and the people in my life make appearances as if they are consciously choosing to. That's very common. It's a highly sacred experience, highly spiritual, and so I returned from that with the title of the record. And then I think at the next weekend I had a similar experience with some different pieces of music, in which one of which was a track called Weeping Birch by Dan Deacon, which is a truly extraordinary piece of music as well. And the difference about that occasion was that I started bringing in the breathing techniques of the Wim Hof breathing whilst in the ketamine space. And I mean, I don't know if you've ever tried anything like that.
A little bit I have. It really takes things to another level. I mean,
and I've done it with psilocybin and DMT, and slow nose breathing is like my lifeline. But actual Wim Hof method breathing during ketamine was just like, what the fuck? It was like bursting through the ceiling of the universe. And I reached that place, I know you've been there, where you get it. You get everything. You understand just briefly, you understand everything, and you're fully 100% awake and tuned in. And it was a heart space thing. It was like I'm 100% in here and 0% up here. And that kind of laid the foundation for this thing starting to form into one body of work. I would say those two events.
Man, I've had similar experiences where you're listening, you have an experience with music in those spaces, and it's so powerful and salient on, like, that's really why I do kind of everything I do with music now. And there are many times that I doubt it, that I'm like, I talk to musicians and friends and people on this show and otherwise, and they're like, a lot of musicians are like, I have no agenda with my music, like almost secular, apolitical. But it's deeply personal for them. But they're like, I'm just making it. You interpret it as you like. You do what you want with it. And I've often felt the opposite personally, where I had these feelings about what it could be, or what if I could just have the courage to say, hey, this is what I'm doing with it. This is what you could do with it too. And maybe even that way it's a tool. But how do you feel about that? If someone were to say, like, they'd ask you, like, do you have an agenda with this particular album or not?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it turns out I do. I'm not sure I was thinking about it when I was writing it, but, like, there's always the subconscious doing its thing. But the agenda is to, I suppose, do my little bit to advance the conversation about psychedelic therapy. There's many things I want to try and do with it, but that's one of them. And, we've talked a little bit about this separately, but I think, there's a huge amount of news and breakthroughs and science going on around the subject, and almost no one mentioning the music. And the music, as anyone who's had a deep experience with psychedelic medicine knows, that the music is about half of it. It's like the structure into which
or more. Yeah,
or more.
It really is. It can be literally become the space.
Yeah, and I find with ketamine in particular, and this album is the length of time that my particular ketamine journeys tend to take. I find that you merge with it to such a degree that you flow as it, and you flow through it and with it, and so that leaves you in this incredible position when you're writing it, of like knowing that you're building a universe on a screen which you will then enter. So you're make it, and so of course you want to make it as incredible as possible, and you also need to test it by re-entering it in that space sometimes. So I wanted to, I suppose, really, name the album in a way, just, this is what it is, but it's also an album of music, and it doesn't require medicines. You can, it's definitely one for deep listening. It's not something maybe people will have it on the background. In fact, it's not really for me to say
sure
what the limitations are of what it can do, but the way I hear it, it's like, it's quite an emotionally intense thing, and, for me, obviously. But I think, there's an important topic that needs to be discussed. So I suppose it's like a little conversation opener in a way.
Yes, and I couldn't agree more that it seems to be a bit of an afterthought in this burgeoning psychedelic wave that we're in, is the experience itself. I'll just call it the journey, the ceremony. And that element of ceremony, and what a large role music plays to guide it. And that's how it's been done for millennia. Is music is the ceremony itself, whether it's the carves in the ayahuasca ceremonies that they often define as what is actually calling forth the spirit, is the songs and the words and the melodies of those songs. You look at a shipibo. I have one in the house, the Shipibo embroidery tapestries.
I have one as well, actually, yeah.
Yeah, and I was told that the actual like geometry of the shapes is of the melodies. It's of the songs.
So it's a score.
There you go. Oh my God, yeah, it's sheet music. So
yeah.
And you see this in other ceremonies as well, from Lakota sweat lodges, and it's all about the songs and how the lineage of those songs. So it is a very important element. I think there is this really interesting vanguard of like, what is this modern musical language for us, for people who grew up in the West, who are entering into these modern spaces that are getting commercialized, but also sometimes just people in their own homes. And in that way, do you think of yourself, or did you ever, when you were making this process, with the recognition that you're like, I hate to say this, but I mean, you're a facilitator, but it's a form of like digital shamanism. I mean, it's a big role. Did you ever think like you're playing a very strong, active hand in guiding people's journeys?
Yeah, I think that's, I suppose, why I take the writing process so seriously. Now, I would never call myself a digital shaman, but just because I feel like I don't have any education about the indigenous ways of
absolutely
holding
the work. The work I meant is serving the role of a facilitator once you sort of put it out in the world. You know.
Yeah, I think when we talk about electronic music in particular, and the ability of electronic music to have this particular synergy with, let's just keep talking about ketamine, because this is that this was the thing, the guiding hand in this album so much. It's really different. So I sometimes listen to things that are acoustic and guitar based and have voices, and they're all extraordinary. But there's something about immersive, dimensional electronic music that feels like a frontier. It's like there's something, and it has to be, because that genre is reasonably new, and ketamine itself being used as an entheogen in a way is also new. So it feels like we're kind of in this amazing position to explore something that potentially could be incredibly powerful. It's quite hard to measure exactly what it's doing, but I've come out of experiences with so much clarity, so much perspective, and so much wonder. And so yeah, I think like in the creative process with this one, I just took that incredibly seriously, as if I was, as if that was my role. And then, of course, it's up to people whether they trust in me to listen to it like that.
Well, I want to talk about the nuts and bolts of making this, because I'm very interested in that. But let's start more broadly with like, how did it differ from how you make other records? Like, I'm guessing that a lot of this you have to open yourself up to that intuitive, improvisational, like allow that larger thing to flow through, as opposed to like just your discursive mind deciding, okay, it's going to have this at 20 minutes in, it's going to need some more rhythm, or it needs to go into a minor or whatever. What was that process like that maybe was different with this piece versus before?
It was really kind of by removing any grid and any rhythm of any kind. So no tracks have any tempo. Nothing ever happens with regularity. Everything's always fluid. And I found that, and that wasn't a conscious decision, but yeah, so I suppose to respond to what you're saying, I'm always open to that immediate flow of stuff, that immediate improvisational beginning to a track. But if I'm making something that needs to be danceable or performable in a certain way, then at some point the rhythm comes into it. And for many people, they can compose the rhythm in that same kind of flow state. And for me, it's very, very technical. It's very, very, it can be very exhausting making kick drum centered music. I don't dislike any of the stuff that I've done in that world, but it's definitely not what I felt like doing. So the removal of that framework and the removal of any rhythmic framework allowed for this, what I think of as like a different kind of rhythm to come in, which was the rhythm of things as they landed, So there's a lot of field recordings on there, and rather than put them on the track and move them around and edit them, I just put them on, just let them sit how they were supposed to sit, or sit how they were recorded. Any idea that came, drag it on almost at random, and just listen to it with the knowledge that increased with every working day on this, that it would be right straight away. And this happened again and again and again. There's so many synchronicities where things just landed right. and it happened with the sounds that came up. And so, like one example, right? I sometimes when I'm working later into the evening, I'll drink beer at the same time. It seems to unlock a couple of extra hours of energy and take some of the work-like feel out of it. So I like really nice beers, and there was this one track that I was working on called Love Flows Over Us in Prismatic Waves. The titles on this record are not really supposed to be spoken aloud, I've just discovered. It's more like to be read as a poem or something, because really it's one whole track. But anyway, that was the track I was working on, and I had this beer, and the track is in F, and for some reason I flicked the beer glass at this certain point, and it was an A, which is the third, the beautiful missing piece of the chord I had, because I had like a major third. So I had a fifth going, and I had a G in there, which is kind of what you might call like a calming neutral chord. And this little flick was just the third, which completed the picture, but in a very subtle way. So I didn't want to like hammer the third in there. But the third is the thing that sweetens everything, and you need to use it sparingly. So rather than think about this for a second, I'd learned by this point, just put a mic on it immediately and record one pass, and that'll be that. And it was, obviously, straight away, exactly right. And then I tuned it down for when the chord changes. I didn't drink more beer to tune it. I just used Ableton. But that kind of thing happened really throughout every track in different ways. And I started to have such faith that I remember reading this Rick Rubin quote. I won't get it exactly right, but it was something like, when seemingly random components join together to make something, or when they seem to make sense, something wants to exist. And
yes. That's so good.
Yeah, there's so many great Rick Rubin quotes out there. It's our mutual friend Corey Allen posts them occasionally, and that's how I saw that one. But yeah, something wants to exist, and I lived by that motto for the creation of this album. It's like this thing has so in a way it became me serving the existence of this thing, and it was difficult not to get like a strange sensation that something I didn't even try. I just went with that sensation and thought, well, if this is delusional, I'll deal with it later. But right now it feels like I'm a channel for something, and I'm lucky to be that channel, but it isn't anything that I did. It's just the way I'm built and the time and all the things I've done in my life. But really, like, something is opened, and this is like flooding through in a way that I've only ever had like trickles before.
Do you think that'll inform your writing process and creation process in the future?
It kind of depends what happens next. I mean, I love the idea of doing a volume 2 of this, but I want to see how it feels to make something this personal a public thing. And also, you can't perform this live. So, there is that, and there's a desire to occasionally perform, which this wouldn't really allow. So,
why do you think you can't? I mean, I definitely understand the challenges, but I've only seen videos of you perform. You get quite creative in your ways that you perform electronic music, and I could see creative ways of doing this. You'd have to reinvent it in a sense. I mean, it would be different. Maybe
it'd be better to say I have no plans to perform it, but not that it's impossible.
Fair enough.
Right now, how I feel about it is that it's impossible because it's exactly what it's supposed to be. And I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. All I'm saying is that the intention, like the purity of it, is exactly what I set out to do. And therefore, any changes, any other versions, and a performance would obviously have to sound different from it. Otherwise, what's the point? Would be not it anymore.
What about this though? I mean, what if the record exists as a tool, as an experience, as an album? But then people would be so excited to say, I want to drop into that kind of space with Jon Hopkins live, where you're just doing something different. But it's what the glue that holds it together is what you're speaking about is your intention, the openness of you creating in the moment, which you've done before anyway, because it's sort of the lens you put on it. And it would be a completely different piece. We just set you up with a series of instruments, some synths, and you just make sound for 2 hours and people lie down.
Yeah, that's more appealing. Yeah, if we take it away from trying to do that thing, trying to make a...
Yeah.
But it could well be that, I'm so unbelievably close to this. It's starting to shift finally. I think we mastered in May. We're now we're talking, it's August. So for a while, I couldn't even talk about certain sections of it without becoming emotional because, the heavier tracks in it, the ones which carry more emotional weight, were a great processing of loss and various things that were going on in my life and in the greater society in the world. So, it's so raw and open. And as I start to talk about it, this is only this is right at the beginning of the process of even learning how to talk about it. I feel like that will become it will kind of heal over and it'll be a little easier for me to detach and talk about it. And then maybe a stage after that will be, okay, maybe I start reorganizing it into something that could be performed. But, one of the things I always find hardest about the traditional album cycle is like you finish something, you put everything into something, you master it. And then it seems like you get about 5 days off and then you have to start working out to play the fucking thing in front of people. And that's the point at which your songs start to piss you off. And that's not what I want with this. It's like, because this as it stands, this record is my actual soul, entirely unvarnished, right? So I don't want to get bored of it. I don't even listen to it right now. And the next time I listen to it will probably be another month. But I need to feel, I want to preserve that for as long as I can before eventually having heard it too many times.
Well, I appreciate you speaking about it now, and I recognize I can feel the vulnerability in it, and I can tell you as an outsider that's what we love about it, and that's what we love about this offering, and that's something we're really hungry for as a people. It's like that sort of exposure to the intimacy of like one human's experience as close as we can get to the center, and that's very present in there, and that's needed. It's really needed now more than ever because authenticity and that genuineness is it's like the gold. It's the golden nectar of our time. So, thank you for doing that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you saying that, and I think, it was like I had this thought at some point when it became clear what this was forming into. It feels like the time for all the bullshit is done. There's no more excuses, just like honesty, true honesty and vulnerability is really the only answer.
All hands on deck, and what's needed is honesty. It's like truth. It's the old tell the truth. It's really incredible, man. I mean, I could really, I could totally see it just becoming a live experience that is that sort of honesty and truth in the live space. I mean, one of my heroes is Keith Jarrett, who, is famous for sitting down at a piano and just going for it and seeing what happens and comes out. And I don't have even close to the virtuosity of his technique, but that spirit of it is something that's been really inspiring to me. And when I play in a quote-unquote ceremony space, like actually guiding people in medicine, which is how I started this whole thing 12 years ago, it's 100% improvised because it just doesn't work if I walk in there with a plan where I think I'm performing. It's got to be just all from the heart, and it's just, I don't know, it's going to take its time. And I feel safe in that environment because people of the medicine, they're patient, they're just in it. We're all just there for a long period of time in the dark. So it feels okay. And that is what my early records actually were. And it felt incredibly vulnerable to share that because I thought, like, the world's going to judge this. They're going to be bored, all this stuff. But it ended up being fine. And it just helped me to slowly lean into it. And I can feel, even all these years later, I still would love to step into the public space, like full, just normal, quote-unquote, performance, ticket holders that theoretically are sober, and do that. But I still, have my own fears about being judged, or it's like people want this or that, or to be entertained, as if that's not entertaining on some level. But when I say it to you, I know that's what I'd love to see. I mean, I'd love to see you do your fully rehearsed thing too, for sure. But I'm like, wow, I would be watching a moment in time where we're just there together and anything could happen or not happen.
Well, it's interesting because completely different tour, but like the tour that I was on when the pandemic first hit, which was called Polarity, which involved like me on a grand piano opening the show and then other players joining. So there was a guitarist, Leo Abrahams, and violinist Emma Smith, and so like there were sections in the show and they increased. I think we got 7 shows in out of the 18 before we had to cancel, or before all the venues were shut, which was an insane experience to live through. But the show was really getting freer and freer. And I realized that, I mean, I grew up improvising. Improvising on piano was my first thing. That's what I learned. That's what I taught myself before I had any piano lessons. And I was
jazz or just...
No, it was never really jazz. It was, it's quite hard to describe it. I mean, you wouldn't be surprised if you were to hear it. Like, it sounds like me. It's just, it just got a bit more dissonant and a bit more daring in the chord structures because, you know, on my albums, the recent albums, well, no, all the released albums, you know, there's no kind of, there's some unusual chord sequences, but the chords themselves are not like, they haven't got like crazy clusters of notes, and they're not particularly complex. But I started to find that when I was at school, I did a bit of jazz improvising, but I started to find in this tour that I was getting more and more open to unusual harmonies and more daring. And by the end of it, I was doing, I think, about 15, 20 minutes where I would, at the beginning of the show, where I'd just walk on with no idea what my first note was going to be. And
how'd that feel?
It was incredible. It was liberating because that's where I started, and I'd kind of hidden that because I thought it'd be scary, but in a way it's less scary because I did the same thing at Sydney Opera House. In fact, that was the first time I did it. It was like, this is a test. I had this show in Sydney, and it's like, I'm going to do 20 minutes on the piano to start, and then I'm going to walk over to the electronic stuff and just do what was currently my rehearsed set, which was all really upbeat. So it was like 2 shows in a way.
That's cool.
But it felt amazing. And so I thought, okay, I'll build the UK Europe tour around this, and be more confident with it and have lots of sections like that. And it just became, because the thing that makes me most nervous is the technology crapping out. Because
oh my God, me too.
That's what happens.
I don't even want to talk about it because I know. Get scared talking about it.
It's a horrible feeling. And, you know, the show I mentioned at Glastonbury, to all those people, there was no proper backup system because we were on tour and couldn't like bring double of everything. You know, it was just, it really should have done, to be honest, but because the show is quite freeform, you can't just have a tape running in the background. You know, basically it is my responsibility to sort that out, but generally it's if you're carrying, you know, there's only a certain amount of stuff that a small crew can carry around.
Yeah.
I'm not going to make excuses about it because obviously, you know, in 200 shows, I probably had 5 or 6 where it's just gone silent at some point. And crowds are actually very cool with it most of the time, as long as you can get it going again. But that is my fear. It's not because I know how to do the rest. I know how to play the music and I know how to... But sitting at the piano, nothing can go wrong. You just play. And that's what I've been doing for 36 years or something, 38 years.
Yeah, I have some friends who tour and they literally have like 2 systems off stage. And you hit a button, it just goes to the other one kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I saw a band.
Yeah,
I wish I had that. I just don't have the space for all that kind of gear right now.
Well, that's it. It's the same. That's the same with our crew. We had like 7 or 8 people and a lot of lights, and a lot of other stuff, and you know, and the setup to duplicate everything and also to work it into the things I have on stage. I mean, you
it's
could have the laptop.
Yeah.
How do you have your hardware controllers duplicating and your Chaos pads, which I use, which that's audio only? So
I couldn't do that. Yeah, I mean,
it was too complicated. And
only way you
heavy.
could really do that is I have like literally a whole separate setup off stage. It's like on a platform that wheels, which would be ridiculous. It's like,
I think
push this one off.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's where the real fear, I think, comes from about performing, and generally it's fine. Ableton itself is incredibly stable. If there's a problem, it would be with the interface or the power or something. It's happened, and as long as you can get it going again, if anything, sometimes crowds get more hyped up by the drama of the fact that
they're like, it's real, or something's real, happening. Exactly. It's a very real moment. I mean, it's a very, very powerful moment for everyone involved. But I've even noticed the feeling, like when I'm playing, I've never even said this before, but like sometimes when things feel really in a flow and then your mind notices that and the audience is there, and then there's a voice that comes in that's sort of like the critical, like, well, what if the power goes out, or what if is the computer this? And I'm like, it's the meditation or actually the moments from psychedelic spaces that allow me to sort of love that thought and just be like, it's okay, back into it, back into it. It's just this constant sort of like clenching and releasing. The tension of the moment.
That's life, clenching and releasing. Sounds unpleasant. It is life. But that reminded me of something. So when I was a teenager, I was at the Royal College of Music on the Saturdays, which they had like a junior department, and I had piano lessons with a really high level piano teacher called Emily Jeffrey, who was incredible and changed my life because she got me into proper classical piano training, and she got my finger technique up to an incredible level that I wouldn't have had a chance or been inspired to do. And I found it really hard at first and wasn't that engaged, but she managed to get me fully inspired. And the results of that I can, when I'm in practice, I can access that again. So I can be quite virtuosic, and that was really useful on the Polarity Tour. But briefly I thought, okay, maybe I'll be a classical pianist and that'll be my job. This was me when I was a teenager, and then I had one concert which changed my mind forever. I won this competition at the Royal College of Music, which meant, and the prize of it was that you played a concerto with the orchestra to an audience in this grand concert hall. That to me didn't really feel like a prize so much as an unbelievable punishment. But I've never felt pressure like that in my life, and it went really well in terms of how it was received. But my experience of it was hellish, and there was, I played Ravel's Piano Concerto in G, which is incredibly technically complicated and utterly beautiful. But there was a point which I'll never forget. Bear in mind, there's no sheet music. You've learnt it all by this point. You've been playing it for months. There's this point where I was just like looking down at my hands, and they were doing all this shit, and I was like, just for a second, that very same voice you just talked about, it came in and it said, what are they doing?
What is happening here?
What are your fingers doing? It's like, but rather than have any, being a 16-year-old with no experience of, what that voice is, no understanding of how that voice can be bypassed or transcended, I just froze. I mean, I didn't freeze. Like somehow the fingers kept going, but I managed to freeze that part of my brain out of sheer necessity until I got to the end. But it was such an awful experience that I then and there essentially decided that I will never do that as a job. And it's like, also it wasn't really creative enough to play other people's music. But yeah, that voice is terrifying.
Was that an element of it, though, the fact that it was someone else's music that made it harder or scarier? Whereas, because you kind of did continue with the job, but you changed the way you did it.
Yeah, so if you're improvising and it's yours, there is no wrong anyway. And because I play I play by ear and without thinking of scales or anything like that. So if some weird notes creep in, you can weave them in. Principally, originally I'm a piano player, so I feel increasingly comfortable just doing that. But it's as soon as you bring in all the other elements and people and other humans as well, things get much more complicated.
Yeah. That's the thing with playing solo versus having other members. It definitely changes the dynamic of what you play in the moment and so forth, and what's planned and all that kind of stuff. But so I wanted to ask you, this album is largely electronic elements. I hear a lot of analog synthesizer, I'm guessing. Is it a lot of that Moog 1 in there?
Yeah, Moog 1, MS-20, called Trinity, a tiny bit maybe, but most of it is, there's this plugin called Unicorder, which Nils Fromm helped make, which is an amazing kind of, it does a lot like his felt piano type sound thing.
Yeah, I've used it
very
a
convincingly.
little bit. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't use the sounds in a normal way, but because, you can just play a piece that sounds like a Nils Fromm piece. It's not as good, but you can just, it allows you to step into that world very easily. And I'm not interested in doing that because he's doing that and lots of people are doing that. But, he's a singular genius. I want to point that out. But
yeah,
I'm
a huge Nils Fromm fan, and he came very close to doing a remix on the Ram Dass album to the point where we were sending stems and it was into it. I was just like over the moon, but
yeah.
He disappeared.
Yeah, he's a busy man.
Nils, we love you. But,
yeah, he's incredible. But anyway, so he made this plugin which allows anyone to play that felt piano sound, basically, which is incredible.
Yeah, it's great.
But I didn't want to do. I mean, I've also got a piano with a felt thing on it, so if I want to do that, I will. You can see it. So
yeah, there's the felt right there.
Yeah, it's a beautiful sound, and but with this plugin, I found that it was a great source for other sounds, abstracting that. So it's like taking that as a source sound, because I love to take real instruments and put them through really any processing that.
Actually, but I need to interrupt you. My friend Justin Beretta, who's in the Glitch Mob,
I've been in touch with him. Yeah.
He describes you. He says Jon takes sounds and puts them through the Hopkins Destructo machine, and then they become whatever it is, and no one can replicate it. And I was like, yes, the Jon Hopkins Destructo machine.
All it is just a lot of processing. It just goes through chain after chain, and I save the chains, and then I'll. Again, trusting in the synchronicity of it all and the desire of it all to become something, I might put in a random chain of things on something that was supposed to be doing something completely different, and then suddenly a new thing is born out of that.
But what kind of things are you doing? I mean, a lot of like octaves, pitching, verbs.
Ableton is so infinite. I mean, Altiverb is probably one of the most creative tools. Because I'm obsessed with dimensional space within music, with stereo music, and increasingly within spatial audio, which I'm getting into. So Altiverb, all the Sound Toys stuff, Echo Boy obviously is incredible, but these things are instruments in their own right. That's how I view them. So like you've got your sound, that's great, whatever it is. Say it's a normal piano, and then you put all these effects on it, and then you mute the dry, and then you maybe resample that in Ableton and make a new instrument out of that, which you play on your keyboard, and then you put that through another chain until it's just really not in any way what it was, but flowing freely down whatever sort of calls to me, whatever extra layer of processing calls to me. So I never use sends or returns. Every single sound has its completely unique way of being processed, so you would never use one reverb for several things, for example. And using the
processor heavy too. Do you have to end up sort of bouncing into stems so you can keep going?
This laptop that we're talking on now is actually what I've been using, and it's seems to be pretty fast. I mean, there'll become a point where if you use a lot of tape simulation, like there's a sound on the album which uses, I'm not joking, about 25 instances of a tape simulator in a row.
25.
I think it was about 25, and it was a Slate.
Hell of a laptop.
It was a Slate plug. Well, no, that's the thing. It couldn't handle that. But what I found, there was this Slate. It's called Slate Tape Emulator or something. I can't remember what it's called, but
I've got
quite
that.
a new. And it's very processor heavy, even to use one. But it's very, very subtle. And I think the idea is you put one on every track or something, and maybe, I don't know. I haven't read about it, but I'm interested in, the fact is on Ableton, you can just click on a plugin and Apple D and it duplicates it. So I thought, okay, I put 4 on.
It's too easy.
It's incredibly easy. All this stuff is just playing around. But the trick is to judge whether it's good or not. And that's what I think probably what takes years of doing it. But you can certainly get things done very, very quickly. So I noticed that, like, with 4 instances of that, there was a little tape wobble that was becoming a bit more apparent. I was like, that's what I was looking for. So I selected all of those and then duplicated the 4 to 8 and then 8 to 16. And it started slowing down a lot, but it got more and more interesting. It was like, it started sounding incredible. And so I realized, okay, so I'll bounce everything else, and so nothing else is using any processing, and I'll get this part right, and then I'll freeze this part, and then, bring that back into another session. So sometimes I'll work across multiple sessions in order to preserve that. But yeah, most of them, with this laptop, which is about a year old or a year and a half old, it can deal with it. And I've also just got a new actual desktop Mac, which I haven't yet wired in, so I think that will probably allow even more.
You can do like 100 tape plugins and just keep going, man. Just see how far down the rabbit hole go. Yeah.
But it's interesting to me to just try things that these things were not built to do that. And but then the realm of electronic music making is completely open and completely free, and you can, as long as it sounds good, it doesn't matter what you do or how well you understand what you're doing. I don't even try and understand what some of the plugins are actually doing to the sound. It doesn't interest me, but the sound of it interests me. And obviously mixing's a big part of this, and I'm more technical in mixing, but when it comes to creating sounds, just follow a train of thought. That's really
it's so inspiring. So, but when you were doing the music for psychedelic therapy, and you said it was largely from this intuitive space, but you're using electronic synths, were you just doing that in real time? Like that opening track, it's fantastic, and you've got that bass sub that's sort of sliding. Was that just you? Because there's different layers there going on, I assume. So
so it's like building I think of it like building a room or building a universe or whatever, building that space that you're going to enter into. So there's obviously the first part that comes first. And for me, there's something very mysterious about the way that track existed or came to exist, because for me, I always have to be sitting in this room before I have ideas. I don't start the idea. A track doesn't occur to me when I'm walking around. But I'm aware that my brain is taking everything in, and like when I get into the studio, something will come out, if I'm feeling creative. But just this one time, I was walking around the area where I live, and it was like the middle of winter, and there's no one really around because everyone was kind of in their houses and lockdown and all that stuff. And I was like, out of nowhere, this idea for those ascending notes at the start just appeared, and like I knew what note they were going to start on, and I knew that they would rise and rise and rise, and there'd be one here and there'd be another one that comes up. And so it's like that idea just appeared. And that, honestly, it's the first and only time that's ever happened to me. And at the same time as I was walking, I was like in the middle of a text conversation with my friend who lives in Devon and records under the name Seven Rays. And he's on several of these tracks. He's got a kind of small holding farm, and he's got a little solar powered studio. It's not even that little, it's actually pretty big. It's a kind of beautiful room with maybe 15 different synths, and he's kind of collected a lot of strange old synths. And I don't want to talk about the exact one it is because there's something mysterious about not mentioning it, but he dove into this. He just, for some reason, like not having made music for years, primarily farming and raising his family, he just had become possessed by delving into this particular synth. And in fact, I'll talk about what it is. I don't know why I'm trying to be mysterious. It was this synth called a Fismo, an Ensoniq Fismo, which is from the mid-90s. It's so impenetrable. It's got this tiny little screen like that. And you try and save your sounds, you'll lose your sound. You have to be recording in audio at all times. And it makes these extraordinary generative tones, and he became obsessed with just creating loads and loads and loads of them. And he was just sending me streams of them. And neither of us knew why. We just knew that he was following something good. We didn't know we were working together at this point. He was just doing it and sharing it. And then these notes were rising in my head, and I got to the studio and there was one particular one. It was Fismo test number 11. I remember it very clearly. I dragged it into the track, which was, with these ascending notes. And obviously it fit perfectly first time, and that's the basis of the track. And then layer after layer of that, the rest of it wrote itself based on how those elements sounded. But the fact that he happened to be doing that at that exact time at which that idea appeared in my head that's awesome. This album was full of things like that. It would just, so I wasn't even surprised by the end of it.
Well, Sit Around the Fire is like that too, I would imagine too. It's like had a very much synchronistic element of coming into being. Oh, my dog. Hiya. It's just this dog is with me part-time, and she's like 12 going. She's like a 75-year-old grandma who's just very like particular about what she likes.
Right.
But the first track that I was curious though, it definitely feels to me intentional for the role it plays in the album. Like as soon as that ding, and then it starts to, you're like, whoa, we're gonna go somewhere together. Yeah. I mean, so it seems like, did you create it and then decide this should be first, or do you thought yourself it needs to start with sort of like a strong entrance?
Well, the creation of that one was it's such a memorable moment because I spend a lot of time over music as we talked about, but I write the basis of things very quickly. And this one really took 2.5, 3 days to form structurally. And I, finessed the sound and mixing was very complex with that to make everything sit right. But that just appeared with such clarity and with such speed. That's why it's called Welcome. It was just, to me, that could go nowhere else on the record. The trouble was working out how to make it fit into other things that came later, and it took it's discovering that, of course, it goes into Ecuador, and it was like, making that work energetically was a fun challenge, but because if you could almost go from that into something energetic, and maybe it will be the good start of a DJ set or something.
It could go a lot of different directions from there.
Exactly.
For sure.
Yeah. But friends of mine who've had psychedelic experiences in their life, particularly or strong ones, that when they heard that for the first time sober, they were just like, they described this kind of almost like a stomach lurching, like,
yep.
What? Wait a minute.
Yeah, where are we going? Oh God, what have I done? Yeah.
Yeah, and even if you haven't done anything, and people who haven't had that experience, I honestly do think that track may be slightly unclear as to what it's about. And I played it to my mum, and she was just like, she loves the album, but she doesn't connect to that track. And I don't know. I think that one is coming very, very clearly from the DMT space for me. That's where
that's falling off a cliff feeling.
Yeah,
like,
that's where it's coming from. And of course, I'm not aware of that when I'm writing, but listening to it now, I'm like, it's like, whoa. And a friend of mine, Sharif, who actually helps me mix everything, he told me, before he went in to mix this album, we kind of mix things in stages. So I do a layer and he does a layer, and then I come in and finish it off, and he'll do extra little bits. We've got a very kind of organic process that we do together. But before mixing it, he wanted to listen to the whole thing as a mushroom journey to really add what he found to it. And he was like, he took quite a high dose, and then as he was starting to hit its peak, he hit play, and he'd had various interesting visuals going on, and he had a fun time with his cats, and it was all kind of like, we're tripping type stuff. And then he said, as soon as that came in, like ridiculous amounts of rainbows just burst out of every surface, and it was like, what? I haven't done anything like that to that track. I've only tried it with ketamine, and it certainly does the job. But God knows what will happen with other medicines. It's interesting.
Well, speaking of, do you have time to talk a little bit about the Ram Dass track? I want to be.
Oh, we must. I mean,
okay,
absolutely. Yeah.
So where do I start? There's so much to say. I've had a few powerful experiences, probably 5 or 6, and it makes it sound like I do a lot of substances, and I actually don't. I really don't.
No, not do I, actually, weirdly.
Yeah, I think I've worked with mushrooms like maybe once in the past few years, but I feel like I'm working with it every day. It just informs my life, like some of the lessons I've learned, and I find I'm talking about it all the time, but I don't even imbibe with it that much. And
that's interesting.
But my partner is a ketamine
I do
therapist.
it more than that.
Yeah. But ketamine came into my life more recently because my partner's in this totally legal above board therapy situation. So I was going in to work on it. And I was working on a record that was from these improvised mushroom ceremony spaces where I microdose. But I thought it was a mushroom record, and maybe it still is. And that's where it's from. But I found myself testing it in her ketamine with her patients and with myself. And the same simultaneously, we were working on the Sit Around the Fire, and you were sending me some of those early mixes that you created, and so I would play it we just drop it in, and it would just blow me away because
amazing.
It really felt like Ram Dass. Like, it's amazing on just listening to it, but when you're in that space, it's like he is the space. Speaking to you, like he's so perfectly, and the music is so perfectly brings you into that space of like aha about what's really going on. You know, and there's the beauty. How many times tears would come through me when I would think about this imagery of like truly like all we're doing forever is just essentially witnessing one another and sitting around a fire, and that imagery of just carrying each other through this experience for the sake of the experience. It was so beautiful. So I want to thank you for that, but just tell you, like, I would be nervous to tell you on text because I didn't want to be that guy who's like, oh my God, I had this. But I just try to be like, look, man, I had a powerful experience to say the least, you know, last night listening to this song. And it just feels like profound medicine. I think I told you once, it's going to save a life. And what I meant, like, quite literally, I know there'll be at least one, if not thousands, but there'll be one person, I know it, that's going to be on the brink of something. They will hear that, and it'll be enough hope for them to continue on the next day. And that alone is so honorable, you know, no matter what happens with that music.
It's an incredible thought. I've had messages over the years of that severity from people, you know, and that's when I feel luckiest and most grateful, really, that I have this purpose, you know, for like, it's like I would do this anyway, even if no one listens. But it's amazing that they listen, and it's amazing that some people are open to being helped in that way. And I mean, obviously, the dream with this record is that it will do that on deeper levels than ever. And but I want to thank you for getting in touch originally and asking me to work on that and giving me the opportunity to have a Ram Dass talk to work over, and also your beautiful vocals, which were the musical trigger. You know, that's where the accompaniment started from that, and then putting him in there and feeling that, you know, that was sometimes making the tracks that have turned out. Well, like I have this track called Open Eye Signal, which was like my breakthrough techno track. It's like came out 2013. That was such a long and difficult process. Like I knew I was on something. I knew the riff was great, but like the technical side of bringing that into being was literally months. You know, literally months to make it sound effortless. Was like, it was weeks and weeks and weeks of the same riff going round and round and round. This was the exact opposite. It's not a hugely technically complex track. It's all about feeling. It's all feeling, and it's all love, and it's all his words guiding everything, and having his words in my headphones and improvising the piano over it, and letting the instrument of his voice and your vocals and my piano play off each other, and not having to move or edit anything. It was like wherever your vocals landed, that was where they were supposed to land, wherever the piano landed.
That's crazy. Yeah,
all of that stuff. You know, I mean, minor changes only. Sometimes just a bit more space here and there, but it was like, this is nothing. And it was done so quickly. There's obviously some time into making sure the mix was right and making sure his voice sounded present and not too bright. And we were talking about this the other day, like the particular quality of the tape machine in the 70s that imbues this kind of immortality to the words, because it was never new. It feels like it was never new. You know, it certainly isn't new now. It's coming from a different time as a group of people who are listening to that talk, and we don't know who any of them are. Many of them will be alive, and maybe some of them will hear this and they'll remember it. I don't know, but it feels like this extraordinary opportunity to, through modern technology, get those words out there again to a new generation as well.
Absolutely. Let me shut this door. Yeah, it's a talk from 1975, so it's a long time ago, but he's saying stuff that's so universal. And you're right, it's not necessarily new what he's saying, it's how he's saying it. And it's the feeling that's conveyed. He's in a very special place. It's not intellectual. It's all just beautiful, open. It's just all heart. And so I think that's what's coming through on the music that you were playing, and hopefully in the vocals that are there. Because you had asked me to start something, and I'll be honest with you, that was something I tried not to think about too hard, because I was like, you know, I've been a fan of you for a long time, man. So it's like when you're like, hey, send me a song, the last thing I want to do is like, oh my God, I could spend a year on this. But I'm like, just send something, just make it a first draft and don't worry about it too much. Knowing that you'll mess. I knew the Destructo machine. I was like, and then let you just destruct it and do whatever. Let it be just a match to a fire. So it was just really wonderful that could then, because I remember when you went into the studio, you said it's kind of like one big session. You're like, I just had this amazing experience where it just all came out. And that's always a great sign, or it's a great feeling. I know that feeling.
It's amazing. Yeah. I think it was great that you were open to doing that, because in collaborations, I always ask for a starting point. It doesn't really matter how finished it is, as long as the person I'm working with is happy for it to be destroyed and rebuilt.
Exactly.
But the point is, the seed was there, like beautifully there. Like the vocals were it, and it was just a case like of just putting them. I think I remember like having the session up and soloing them, and before I even listened to them on their own, just put them into one of these chains that I have ready already, and it's like, so there's altiverbs definitely in there. There's a few other reverbs, but it just straight away is like, yeah, that's it.
And at that time, you didn't have this record wasn't really a record. You didn't know it might just be a single. I think we were thinking we just put it out potentially as a way to celebrate just more Ram Dass.
That's it. And I think the idea came a bit later, that it would close this record. I mean, I had written the Taos Caves piece at this point,
right?
Which I've talked about in online and stuff. But that, that's been available for a while on through a paywall on the website taos.org, TAYOS.org. If anyone wants to go and listen in advance of the album release, that was 20 minutes of stuff that was written and that was born in Rainforest in 2018, and so that was the true seed of this album. But again, I didn't see that as something that would necessarily be on an album either. And then it was really from Sit Around the Fire appeared, and then I think it was really from January where I just went through a lot of stuff in my life and then just channeled. And this is when I sort of turned into this bizarre beer drinking shamanic channel where like 4 months of trance state music just started appearing from, and then it was like, okay, Welcome is the beginning, Taos is the middle, Sit Around the Fire is the end, everything in between has just appeared, and that's kind of it, really. Because
your Singing Bowl piece was before this, and I'm curious, like, coming from like someone who makes such like intense, beautiful techno music, like that end of the spectrum, and then same artist releases the Singing Bowl piece. I mean, you're speaking my language because I'm all over myself. It's like I do all sorts of things, but it's like, is there a part of you that was like holding back or nervous about taking that shift? This is your career too and your job, or you're just like, no, this feels very clear to me that it doesn't matter like what niche it's going to fill, how I perform it, what the fans think. This is what I need to do.
Yeah, I've never been so certain about anything, and I'm realizing that as I start to finally talk about this, having kept it to myself for ages. I mean, of course, there's all the practicalities, but I think that the practicalities of like changing the direction of what you're doing. But I have always made solo piano pieces.
I don't think it's a departure.
There are ambient pieces out there, but it's true that the focus tracks in the last 10 years have all been big rhythmic entities, and but you can't keep doing the same thing forever, and I really was done with that, and I will go back to doing. I'm definitely not done with rhythm. I'm fascinated still how to bring in maybe this more digital shamanic element into back into a more danceable area, because I think that could be really powerful for people on the dance floor. But really, I think I've never felt more sure about anything, to the point where if it's I don't expect amazing reviews. I think you kind of have to listen to this quite a lot of times in a certain way to hear it properly. I'm not really expecting anything at all. It just needs to exist, and it does, and people can do.
Well, the reviews you're going to get essentially are the people who do this for the journeys, and because of the title. This happened for me when I did Music for Mushrooms. Like it helps people. It's an invitation.
Yeah.
Like if you'd called this something else, it actually would have done a disservice to what it really is. Because of the title, it will be used by people in ketamine therapy clinics. It will be used by individuals all over the world for a long time. And because of that, they will then enter into some incredibly profound states that the music will help usher them into and sort of guide them into these spaces. And that alone is doing such a service to the movement of humanity trying not to kill themselves, just to help people. I got to commend you for that, because knowing from my own experience, that takes a lot of bravery to say, you could have called this album anything.
I know what you mean. It's just, but that's when it comes back to that point really about now is not the time.
Well, that's what I'm commending. It's like, I totally agree with you. It's like a lot of people would be like, I'm sure there's record labels or PR people. I've been working on a book, and this is a side note, but I sent it to an agent, and this agent didn't get it. And the first thing they said to me is like, I think this would work if we took the drug stuff out. And I was like, oh, the drug stuff. Yeah, okay. I was like, there's still people out there generationally mostly who think oh, you're making a big mistake, or you don't want to talk about that. Or it's like, and I think that it's, the tables have turned so much in the last year that it's sort of now it's a moot point. But
even the last year. But it's interesting because my Singularity album, I did go out and talk about most. I mean, it has a I can't remember now if it's a psilocybin or a DMT molecule in the stars on the front cover. And I mean, that's reasonably hidden, but not that hidden if you know what you're looking for. And I did talk in the press quite a lot about how the track Luminous Beings came from a psilocybin experience in the desert. And I met no resistance really, because I think, I'm an indie artist.
A musician too, yeah.
Yeah, musician. I'm not mainstream, never going to have, it's not like I'm, I'm not going to pick a band, but just some huge act. It's just, it would be very, very much more dangerous for that. But people that are paying attention to what I'm doing are generally seem to be inclined that way anyway, or at least open to having, what we all want to do here is have an adult conversation about some medicines that exist. That's really,
sure.
And we need musical frameworks for these. So that's really what's most important, and I'd be surprised if anyone who hears, is this going to be, it's in my head, it's like, it's the most experimental thing I've done. Who knows, of course, whether Round Dust track could potentially reach a lot of people, because
the words alone make it very accessible. And, there's ideas there, and you did beautiful work there. Just a couple more questions, and then I'll let you get on with your beer drinking evening there. And your day.
Not drinking this evening, actually.
I'm sure I'll have a beer.
Yeah, good.
Your voice. There's a moment in the record where, way in the background, there's someone humming, and the couple times I've journeyed to the record, that is my favorite moment for some reason. Something about it feels like I don't even know how to describe it. It's childlike. It just takes me somewhere. And it's the way, there's so many elements in this record that are like, you kind of have to reach for them with your ear. Like they're back there. It's not just given to me. And I'm like, so I have to kind of investigate with curiosity. Like, what is that? And then I asked you, I said, is that you singing? And you said, yes. And I was like, well, you have a nice voice. Like, why is this sort of hidden in general? Do you sing often, or when does this come into your music? And tell me about that moment and what that serves. It's the only time I hear it in there.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's interesting. I have been singing on my stuff for a long time, but I tend to do it, like, to mention that track, Open My Signal, there's this kind of choral-ish sound in there. That's my voice layered up many times, and then there's a lot of process. Yeah, there's a lot of processing on it in that. What I don't do is leave it unprocessed in this way. So this has just got a little bit of reverb placement, but otherwise it's untouched. So the way it happened was, again, all about trusting that there's a purpose in this, and that this wants to exist in a certain way. I was finishing this end, or just working on the end section of the track where that appears, and I've divided them into separate chapters now, but really it's, somewhere in the second half, you could say it is. And it's been quite cosmic for quite a while. There's been like a 10-minute section of really quite crazy harmonics and very electronic-based sounds, which, when you're within the medicine, you kind of, for me, that's very, like, galactic and very cosmic and very highly, highly not to do with Earth in particular. It's very out there. And as it came to an end, that section, I was like, what I'm craving here is something earthbound, something completely grounded. And my normal go-to is to, is the piano, to go over there and just simple piano chords at this point would be nice. But I was like, wait, but I always do that. And Sit Around the Fire's coming on in like another 10 minutes or something, I realized, just because otherwise it's going to be a 90-minute album. So, and I caught myself humming, and I hum all the time. Anyone who's ever like taken anything with me or just hung out with me for a period of time, certainly anyone who's ever done DMT with me knows that I hum with the music. And I feel like it's a bridge between, it is a bridge between yourself, your deepest part of yourself, and the vibrations that you're taking in.
It feels really good too.
Yeah, it feels really good. And the medicine as well, it makes you feel great on the medicine. And so I found myself humming, and then I was just like, right, I'm going to get that microphone, the same one I used to capture the beer glass, and just hummed it out. And there was this really strange noise on the channel. Having said it was unprocessed, it wasn't unprocessed. I did do some filtering, and because there was this crazy, sometimes you plug your mic in and it makes all these weird crackly noises, and I my engineer Sharif deals with all the mics. So I don't know anything about why they might go wrong, but on this occasion, this mic was just crackling like a fire, and it was kind of cool, but very disruptive. So I hummed this melody, and then in order to get rid of the bits of that crackle I didn't like, I had to make quite a tight filter around it, which had the effect of just making it really, really pure, almost sine wavy, but keeping all the inflections. To me it sounds slightly Celtic and slightly, I don't know, almost like a strange little ceremonial, a kind of Celtic Icaro or something, but it just appeared, and it got treated that way because it had to be treated that way. And then I just put it, I placed it with the reverb, and it was just like, guess that's there then. It felt very kind of egoless and very about, it's like, if you're trying to be honest, and that was about as honest as I could be, because any friend I've taken DMT with or anything, it's taken them straight back to that experience, because this part of me just will do that. So it's putting everything of myself into it.
Well, it just sounds like I hear over and over again these series of gifts that were coming through, like a little melody or a little mistake, but you're accepting it as a gift. Maybe it's an idea, and it all just starts. You're receiving of all the little things that came in and allowing them to just be inputted in, like, oh, we'll figure it out later, but it ends up typically being the piece. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah, and it's that's such a joyful way to write, and it's nice to write something where you don't feel like you fought with it at any point. And it was, I'll never forget the experience. Whatever happens to it, it's important to remember before anyone hears it that the experience itself was life-changingly beautiful. So,
Well, it's been the same for me, getting to know you and working even in a tiny way on this record with you. I'm honored, and I'm just so overjoyed that it's getting out into the world. And we all thank you for stepping forward with such grace and authority to say, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm doing it. I've done it.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate that. And once again, thank you for inviting me to work on that beautiful speech with you. And look forward to meeting in person.
Yes, of course. And thank you to Ram Dass and the Love Serve Remember Foundation, and everybody else, to Anna for introducing us, and to Domino for working on this, and everybody else. It's been really great. Is there anything else you'd like to say to let people know before they were? Is there any, like, hey, if you're going to listen to this record, this is my message to you, or is it just totally like, it's your call, do your thing?
I think generally, I think we've pretty much covered it all, apart from, I think at some point, whether you use medicines or not, listen to the whole thing lying down in the dark.
Give it the space.
Carve
out the space a bit. Turn off the phone. It's like, give yourself the hour to experience it.
Yeah, that's it. Whether it's headphones or speakers, really whatever you feel most comfortable in. There's something about headphones which does work well, but then, sometimes blasting it on speakers is, and let it take you over and then just see what happens.
I love it. Jon Hopkins, thank you very much, man. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Jon, for taking the time to chat and letting me ask all my burning questions. I have more, but I'll wait. And hopefully we'll be able to do more live events like we did in Austin together. I thought it was a beautiful marriage, and Jon's just such like a wonderful guy. I enjoy spending time with him. So for myself, selfishly, I'd just like to do more. But I can't wait for you to experience his new album in full, so go check it out. Music for Psychedelic Therapy from Domino Records. You can order the vinyl and listen to it wherever you listen to it. And that Sit Around the Fire song, he's got a video for that, as well as another single off the record. Check those out as well. Really, really beautiful work all around. Beautiful craftsmanship, and just some of the best stuff I've ever heard. So thank you so much, Jon, for coming on. You're hearing a little bit of Sit Around the Fire in the background. I don't want to play too much because I don't want them to tell me I can't play it or something, but, I want to honor the song. So go check it out in full wherever you listen to music. And I hope to see you on December 4th for our live event, our live stream event, so anyone can attend. It's a way of launching JourneySpace.com. Check it out. All right, you guys keep walking your walk. Don't take any shit. But if you do, you know what to do. Do it with grace.
Is your inner connection